In this Elden Ring video, we're going to be talking about patch 1.08 that just dropped for PC and consoles just a couple hours ago. And we're going to cover the new features added to the game, including the Colosseum, as well as balancing changes and bug fixes. So first up, obviously, let's talk about the Colosseum part of the update. There are 3 Colosseums in the game. There is one in Limgrave, there is one in the Lendel area of the game, the Royal Colosseum, and then there is the Caelid Colosseum. So there are 3 possible locations to do this from, and you can fight in any one of these. Now, each Colosseum has its own set of rules, and I'm going to go through those in a second, but the easiest way to access this mode is to go to Round Table Hold, and there's a new Marika statue there by the fireplace that you can access and enter these Colosseums. Note that it seems like in order to select a specific Colosseum that you must have actually visited and opened the doors of these locations in person at least once. So if you haven't done that to any of the Colosseums in your playthrough, you'll probably notice that you're not able to select anything from the statue. So if you're having that issue, I would advise go to like Limgrave's Colosseum, open the doors there, and then go back to the statue and see if that fixes the issue for you. You may have to do this with all 3 of the Colosseums in order to be able to activate all of them. So there are 2 game modes available. There is United Combat, which is team-based, where you can play 1-on-1, 2-on-2, or 3-on-3. There is a password, so you can play with your friends if you want to play with your friends against other people. I expect this to be a thing. Probably be tournaments done this way, and we will probably have our own tournament in the future, so stay tuned for that. And each death counts as points. Players are able to respawn, and the team with the highest score at the end of the time limit wins. The other game mode is Combat Ordeal. This is a free-for-all game mode. Essentially, every player for himself. You can change the number of players, 2, 4, 6, or any number. So if you don't want to wait, you could have 3 people or 5 people, etc. And it works similarly. People can respawn until the timer hits 0. The person with most points wins. So you have those options. Those are available at the Limgrave Colosseum. Now, if you want to do duels, the Royal Colosseum found in Lendel has a duel mode, which allows 2 Tarnished to face off against each other in a 1-death thing. There's no respawn here, so first player to kill the other player wins the duel. There are no points, so if you're a big fan of dueling, you will probably spend the most of your time in the Royal Colosseum. I really hope they add a best of 3 or best of 5 to this game mode in the future, because I feel like sometimes you can get unlucky, and 1 kill doesn't always decide who the better player is. I would like to see, maybe an average of best of 3 or best of 5 might make it more interesting. Also, it takes time to load into these matches and find another match. That would give you more gameplay time per load. And then finally, the Caelid Colosseum features all those game modes, including the duel mode, but players are allowed to use the Spirit Ashes so they can summon them. So this could be crazy. I mean, you could have 6 players free-for-all with everyone's Spirit Ashes with their, tier Ash that is basically a copy of themselves fighting. That could be absolutely insane. Or you could have duels where people are using their, Spirit Summons, and it could make things more interesting for those who are getting tired of regular duels. Can mix it up a little bit, which would be really cool. People haven't really gotten to PvP with this aspect before, so this is a brand new thing. You can't use Spirit Summons in PvP. This is the first time that's possible. I expect people to go absolutely crazy with this game mode. Besides this, a few new hairstyles have been added to the game, so if you've been searching for some more fashion, then you're going to get your wish here with a couple new hairstyles. So that being said, I'm going to run through the PvP exclusive balance adjustments. These apply only to PvP, not when you're playing in single player or cooperatively, so disregard these if you're not doing those. That will get us wrapped up with PvP so we can move on to adjustments that affect all players. So first up, we have the counterattack damage for thrusting weapons reduced in PvP. The counterattack damage is essentially damage you deal with thrusting type damage while an enemy is attacking you with like a forward swing. This happens a lot in PvP because a lot of times you're trading blows, and getting that increased damage with counters is really beneficial of thrusting weapons. They've also reduced the guard efficiency when attacking with your shield up. So if you're holding like a thrusting weapon and you're turtling and you're just poking, they've reduced the damage here. Obviously, the theme with these is they're trying to reduce that shield poke turtle gameplay. Additionally, they've reduced the poise damage with straight swords, thrusting swords, heavy thrusting swords, curved swords, axes, spears, twin blades, and katanas. This doesn't apply to the weapon arts, but just the weapon attacks themselves. I'm assuming they're trying to get people away from just R1 spamming with these weapons. They've also reduced the poise damage of Bestial Sling. I know that's a popular one in PvP for staggering people. And they've reduced the power of the spell Carrion Slicer. This is a spell that, you can just absolutely spam at will. I'm imagining people will probably in PvP, haven't done a ton of PvP, are just mashing R1, attacking way faster than other players and melting them before they can do anything. So the damage of that has been reduced. That's really it for the PvP balancing adjustments. There are a bunch of just general adjustments that I'm going to go through now, which will also affect PvP as well as PvE. But that's not a ton of PvP exclusive changes. I was expecting a lot more, so it seems like they're taking a light approach, and they'll probably tweak things over time. So first up, they've increased the speed and distance of some attacks and reduced the recovery time for daggers, axes, hammers, and flails, dual wielded. I'm assuming that's because people don't dual wield these weapons all that much. Daggers probably, but I don't see people really dual wielding axes, hammers, and flails. I'm assuming they're trying to encourage people to use these weapons more since they're not seeing a lot of play, particularly in the dual wield setup. They've also increased the speed of some attacks and reduced the recovery time for two-handed twin blades. Again, people don't tend to two-hand them as much as they do dual wield. Reapers, fists, and claws. So these weapons should be more effective in general. I love all these weapon types, so I'm really glad to see them getting some love. They've also slightly increased the speed of crouching and rolling attacks with colossal swords. They've increased the stagger damage of axes guard counters, making them more viable when you're using guard counters with them. They've increased the poise when attacking with two-handed hammers, meaning it's going to be harder for you to interrupt it when you're attacking with these weapon types of two-handed. And they've increased the poise damage of claws without changing the weapon art, so you're going to stagger bosses or enemies more regularly with claw attacks. I'm assuming this is mostly going to be bosses. And they've increased the poise value during the activation part of, or the active part of stamp and uppercut or a stamp sweep, the weapon art itself. This is going to make it harder for you to get staggered out of these animations, which is great. They've also increased the poise damage to the weapon slash part of transient moonlight and reduced the poise damage of the wave. So effectively, this is probably a nerf for Moonveil because now you have to actually connect with a weapon to get roughly the same poise damage that you did before, and you're not going to get as much poise damage off the wave part itself, meaning that you have to be a lot closer to the target. Probably in most cases, this will roughly translate to be about the same poise damage, especially on big bosses where you get in close anyway. But in terms of PvP or something like that, or if you're fighting enemies from far away, it's going to be less effective in general. Talking about nerfs here, they've reduced the speed of thrusting swords and heavy thrusting swords crouching attacks. I know these were being abused. They've reduced the stagger caused by double-handed heavy thrusted sword jump attacks. So apparently that was a thing. I didn't know that. They've reduced the poise damage of hammers, great hammers, and some colossal weapons. The weapon arts remain unchanged. This isn't surprising. These weapons have the highest stagger damage in the game. I think they're trying to entice people to use other weapons as well for, staggering. They've reduced the poise damage of the Cragblade weapon art. They've reduced the hitbox duration of the flame portion of Flaming Strike. So if you cast out Flaming Strike's fire, it's not going to last as long and people aren't going to, run into it after it's been cast as easily. They've also reduced the poise damage of Flame of the Redmane. Is this finally getting a nerf? This weapon art is absolutely busted. It's been busted for months. I can't believe they're finally getting around to nerfing this thing. You can absolutely cheese the entire game with this weapon art, so that's crazy. They've reduced the time it takes to activate the guard part of the Shield Bash weapon art, and they've reduced the poise damage of the Gravity Bolt weapon art. This thing is absolutely nuts. On the Falling Star Beast Jaw, I think is the weapon that has this. We did a build with this. This thing could stagger bosses in like 2 or 3 hits from like all a screen away. So this is another one that absolutely needed a nerf. Glad to see that finally made it in there. Other than that, there were several bug fixes. Probably the most notable one, though, is a bug where stamina would replenish when switching to a crouching position while running. I know people were absolutely abusing this. People will no longer be able to do that. So all in all, this is a pretty good update in my opinion. I realize the vast majority of people probably don't PvP in this game. I myself am not a huge PvPer just because balancing has been a huge issue in this game. There's been a lot more to balance than in the Dark Souls games and Demon Souls. So it's been a lot more, you never know what you're going to run into, and if you have a bad setup versus somebody, you're pretty much toast. It's like rock, paper, scissors, nuke type format, and a lot of times people are just running nukes. So it's not something I've been tremendously into. You will see some PvP content for arenas. I feel like From Software is taking steps here to rectify this. They're separating PvP balancing and PvE balancing, which will make the game untouched for those who like the game as it is, and then for those who really like to engage in PvP. It should make for a better experience in the long run. I don't expect everything to be fixed, but this is some new content to engage in for PvPers, and also with the addition of Spirit Summons in the Caelid Arena, I feel like that's going to add a lot of new and fresh things for people to do. Because builds could get kind of crazy with the way you can, pick from so many different Spirit Summons, and maybe a team just throws out like 3 wolves each, and they got 9 wolves running around the arena with them. It's going to be crazy stuff like that. I realize that's not the most powerful summons, but there's lots of fun things you can do, and I think people will really get into that. And as I mentioned, we are going to have a tournament probably in the next month or so, maybe the next few weeks, so stay tuned for news about that. We will obviously give people plenty of time to sign up. We want to make sure we understand all the mechanics of this before we get into signups for that, figure out what the prize pool is going to be, etc. But I'm curious to know what you guys think. Is this a good patch for you guys? I realize PvPers got the benefit of this patch. PvEers got nerfed a little bit, so it's not really a PvE patch. But I'm sure there is a DLC being worked on that's going to be great for everyone, including PvEers. So hopefully that's in the works. Hopefully we'll hear about that soon. I'm not entirely sure. But let me know what you think. Is this something you'd be interested in? As somebody who's not primarily a PvP player, who doesn't PvP much in this game, definitely going to check it out and give it a whirl. You'll probably see some PvP builds up on the channel. And obviously, I will keep doing the PvE content as well, because I know you guys love that too.